All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to try to get to the bottom of this BR Shetty story.
Yeah.
So, fascinating, right? Indian billionaire built this huge healthcare empire in the UAE.
Yeah.
But it's not your typical rags to riches thing. It kind of takes a turn.
Right.
So we've got a bunch of sources for this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've got a great profile in the Economic Times, some shorter pieces from the Arabian Post and Zaya, and a condensed account from your story. So we're going to try to answer the question. How does a guy go from landing in Abu Dhabi with like $8 in his pocket to building a multi-billion-dollar company, only to, have it sold for like 74 rupees?
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
How did that even happen?
Wild ride, yeah. It really highlights how complex global finance is.
Right.
And how fragile success can be, especially when you're talking about international business.
Yeah. So let's go back to the beginning, right? The Economic Times, they really paint a vivid picture of Shetty like arriving in Abu Dhabi in 73 with almost nothing, right?
Wow.
Starts out as like a pharma salesman, pretty humble beginnings.
Yeah, very nice.
When you consider where he ended up, right?
Especially for the scale that he reached.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's what's so interesting, right? Like, he saw this need for private healthcare, like in a place where, the government pretty much provided it all for free.
Right.
That's vision, right?
It is. I mean, most people, they would just see the status quo and just be like, okay, this is how it is.
Right.
But he saw an opportunity.
Yeah, he was like, no, we can do this differently.
Right, exactly.
So he doesn't settle, right? 1975, he and his wife, they open NMC, the new medical center.
Okay.
A tiny little clinic, right? Like a 2-room apartment.
Wow.
And his wife is the first doctor.
Oh, that's great.
So, I mean, really humble beginnings, right? But then from there, NMC grows into this huge healthcare provider. I mean, massive.
Yeah.
And eventually, it goes public on the London Stock Exchange in 2012.
Right. The IPO, yeah.
Huge deal.
Huge deal. Not just for him personally, but it showed that, companies from the UAE were players on the global stage.
Right.
It's not easy to get listed on the London Stock Exchange.
Right.
You got to meet all these financial requirements, show strong growth potential. It's a big deal.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And he's not a one-trick pony either, right?
Yeah.
1980, he founds the money remittance firm, UAE Exchange.
Okay, yeah.
And that becomes hugely successful, especially with all the migrant workers sending money back home.
Right.
So, I mean, it shows you, again, like this understanding of the market, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, he saw a problem.
Yeah.
He saw what these workers were struggling with.
Right.
And he said, I'm going to fix this.
Yeah.
I think that's
smart businessman.
Really smart, yeah.
So as these companies grow, so does his personal wealth.
Right.
We're talking, owning floors in the Burj Khalifa, like a whole fleet of Rolls Royces.
Oh wow.
Private jet. I mean, this isn't just success anymore. This is like living large.
Yeah, and that can be a double-edged sword, right? It's a sign of success, sure.
Yeah.
But it does make you wonder about, financial prudence. How much is being reinvested back into the business,
right,
versus, maintaining that lifestyle?
Okay, so that brings us to 2019.
Right.
Turning point. Muddy Waters, this research firm.
Oh, yeah.
Short selling,
yeah.
So they come on the scene, right?
Yeah, basically they profit from companies failing.
Right.
It's a strange world, right?
Yeah.
They do all this research on companies looking for flaws or signs of trouble.
Right.
And then they bet against them.
Yeah.
And when their research, reveals something big and the stock price drops, they make money.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, so that's Muddy Waters.
So they released this report on NMC Health, and it just sends shockwaves through the market.
Right.
They alleged all kinds of irregularities, like inflated cash flow, massive debts that nobody knew about.
Yeah, so it was like a catalyst, right?
Yeah.
If their claims are true, it suggests that there were some big problems with the company's financials.
Yeah.
That maybe things weren't as rosy as they appeared.
No, the fallout was quick, right?
Yeah.
NMC Health's stock plummets. Shetty's got to step down.
Wow.
And eventually the company is delisted from the London Stock Exchange.
So from being this, darling of the market,
I know,
to being completely removed.
Yeah.
That's a big fall.
It's a huge fall from grace.
Yeah. And it does make you wonder, right? Like how could a company this big
Yeah.
with a successful IPO,
Yeah.
global recognition,
Right.
how could they have such big discrepancies in their financial reporting?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where were the checks and balances?
Exactly.
Was it intentional? Was it negligence? Like what happened?
So they start investigating, right?
Yeah.
And they uncover some shocking details, right? So it turns out NMC Health's actual debt was $6.6 billion.
Wow.
Way more
Way more.
than what they had said, right?
Yeah.
There were all these undisclosed loans and this thing called pledged shares.
Yeah, like pledged shares.
I'll be honest, I don't really understand what that means.
So basically, it's when you use shares of your company as collateral for loans.
Oh, okay.
It's common.
Okay.
But the problem here is that these pledged shares, they were disclosed to investors.
Right.
And that lack of transparency, it could be a sign that they were trying to hide how much debt they really had.
Yeah. So it's not just they owed money, it's they were actively trying to hide how much they owed.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And then Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank, one of NMC's creditors, they file this criminal complaint against Shetty and other executives alleging fraud, forgery.
So now you're talking about not just financial mismanagement, but potential criminal charges.
Yeah.
This is serious stuff.
Yeah, it shows you how big of a deal like these hidden debts were.
Yeah, imagine you're one of the banks that loan money to NMC thinking, oh, their financials are solid.
Right, yeah.
And then you find out, oh, wait, there's way more debt than they said.
So it gets worse, right? The UAE Central Bank, they freeze his assets and they slap him with these travel restrictions.
So now that carefully crafted image, right? The success, the influence, it starts to crumble, right?
Yeah.
The empire's falling apart.
Yeah.
And he's facing serious legal trouble.
From Billionaire to facing travel bans?
To, frozen assets. It's
frozen assets.
Yeah. Big turnaround.
Massive turnaround.
Yeah.
And to top it all off, right?
Yeah.
He ends up having to sell his company, right? Which was valued at like 12,478 crore rupees.
A lot of money.
For practically nothing.
Yeah, a symbolic.
74 rupees
to
an Israeli UAE consortium.
So you sell a multi-billion-dollar company for basically nothing.
Right.
That's a sign of how far he fell, right?
Yeah.
Like, was it a desperate attempt to avoid bankruptcy?
Oh, right.
Or was there more to it?
Yeah.
It's a big question.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's a wild part of the story.
So this all sounds pretty bleak, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this weird turn of events. February of this year, 2024, Shetty's back in Abu Dhabi. Okay. But he's not there for a court appearance. Right. He's there for the inauguration of this Hindu temple that he helped build.
Yeah, so that's where the Zalia article comes in.
Right.
It really highlights this weird contrast.
Yeah.
This guy who was just, in all this financial and legal trouble.
Right.
He's back in the UAE for this event that seemingly has nothing to do with any of that. Yeah. And it shows this different side of him. Yeah. The philanthropy, the community involvement.
It is a little strange, especially when you think about, the Karnataka High Court. Right. They had to temporarily lift his travel ban so that he could go to the inauguration.
That's like, is he trying to rebuild his image?
Right.
Or does he still have, that pull, that influence? Yeah. Despite all this,
yeah,
it's a really interesting wrinkle.
It's a very strange turn of events.
It is, yeah.
So let's take a step back for a second, right? And try to understand the man behind all this. Yeah. Right. The Economic Times mentioned some pretty interesting anecdotes that really paint a more human picture of Shetty.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah. We got to look past the headlines, the financial figures. Right. And try to understand who this guy is at the center of it all, Yeah. How did his personality shape his successes and failures? Right. What made him tick?
Exactly. Yeah. So he often talked about his humble beginnings, even after he achieved all this wealth, right? Right. And he was known for being very generous, through philanthropy, but also just personal acts of kindness.
Right, right.
There's even the story about him giving a Rolls Royce to the singer, KJ Yasudis.
Okay.
Like, on a whim, after he was, like, moved by his performance.
That's interesting, right? That impulsiveness.
Yeah.
It kind of aligns with the risk-taking in business.
Right. But it also makes you wonder, did that carry over to his financial decisions?
Right.
Was his downfall partly because of, unchecked spending?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question.
Risky investments. It's something to think about.
And we can't ignore his political connections, right?
Yeah.
Like, he had strong ties to India's BJP party.
Okay.
Even organized Prime Minister Modi's visit to Abu Dhabi.
So that adds another layer, right?
Yeah.
Were those relationships just political?
Right.
Or did they play a role in his business?
Yeah.
And did they offer him any protection when things started to go south? It's
interesting.
It just gets more and more complex the more you look at it.
Yeah, it really does. So what do we make of all this, right? Like, I feel like the more we uncover, the more questions we have.
Absolutely. I mean, we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah. I think in the next part of our deep dive, we'll really get into, what caused Shetty's downfall,
right,
and what his story means for entrepreneurs, for investors. So stay tuned.
Okay, yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more to unpack here, for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so we just went through, like, this incredible rise, right?
Yeah.
And this, like, equally dramatic fall.
It's wild.
Yeah, but, like, what caused it? Like, was this inevitable, or could things have gone differently?
I mean, it's rarely just one thing, right? It's usually like this whole bunch of different things that lead to a company's, success or failure.
Yeah.
And in Shetty's case, there were definitely some red flags, even before that Muddy Waters report came out.
Oh, okay. What kind of red flags?
Well, one was just the sheer speed of his expansion, right?
Correct.
Like, he was diversifying across all these industries, acquiring companies left and right. And while that can be, a sign of ambition and seizing opportunities,
sure,
it also creates a ton of complexity.
And more companies, more moving parts, right?
Exactly. And sometimes that rapid growth, it can outpace a company's ability to manage it all.
Right.
Like, did they have enough good managers?
Yeah.
Were the right systems in place to keep track of the finances across all these different businesses?
Yeah.
Like, those are important questions.
And it seems like a lot of this expansion was fueled by debt, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
like, we talked about how NMC Health's actual debt was way higher than they initially reported.
Right. And debt in itself isn't necessarily bad.
Right.
Companies use it strategically all the time to grow. Mm-hmm. But when you have a ton of debt,
yeah,
you're taking on more risk.
Right.
You got to consistently generate enough cash flow to cover your interest payments.
Right.
And eventually repay those loans.
So even if, like, the companies were doing well on the surface, that much debt could have made them really vulnerable.
Exactly. And that's where that lack of financial transparency becomes even more concerning. Right? Like, those allegations of falsified accounts, hidden debts.
Right.
It suggests that maybe there was an attempt to mislead investors.
It's like building a house on a foundation of sand.
Yeah.
Right.
It might look good for a while, but eventually it's going to collapse.
And in Shetty's case, like, that lack of transparency didn't just mislead investors.
It probably created this false sense of security for Shetty himself.
Right.
If you're not looking at the complete picture, it's easy to think everything's fine.
Right.
Even when it's not.
But wait, but we also talked about Shetty's reputation for being generous, right?
Well, yeah.
Like, especially with his employees, like, the Economic Times talked about how he would go above and beyond to help them, like, even providing personal support.
Right. Yeah.
Doesn't that, like, point to a positive company culture?
It's a good point. And Shetty may have genuinely wanted to create, like, a supportive work environment.
Right.
But that kind of generosity, it can also create this culture where people are hesitant to question the leader.
Oh, interesting.
Even if they see problems.
Right. So even with good intentions,
right,
that dynamic could, like, prevent important information from getting to the top.
Yeah, you need people who are going to challenge assumptions, offer constructive criticism, even if it's, uncomfortable.
So it's like the lack of dissenting voices,
right,
combined with Shetty's own belief in his success, could have blinded him to the warning signs.
Yeah, that's That's possible, and it really highlights how important it is to have, strong corporate governance,
right?
Independent boards of directors, external audits,
yeah,
robust internal controls. These things are safeguards.
Right.
They make sure that even the most charismatic, well-intentioned leaders are held accountable.
Right.
That there are systems in place to catch problems before they become disasters.
Okay, so we've got these internal factors, right?
Right.
The rapid expansion, the high debt, lack of transparency, maybe these cultural issues within the company.
Yeah.
But were there any external factors that contributed to Shetty's downfall?
Well, I mean, the global economy was pretty volatile in the years leading up to NMC Health's collapse.
Okay.
We're talking fluctuating oil prices, geopolitical uncertainty, a looming threat of recession.
So, like, the global landscape was not exactly stable?
No, not at all. And these external pressures, they can make it really hard to manage a business.
Right.
Especially one with a lot of debt.
Right.
They can expose weaknesses that might have gone unnoticed during good times.
Right, right.
Like
a perfect storm brewing out.
Yeah. I mean, it's rarely just one event that brings down a big company like this. Right. It's usually a bunch of factors, some that you can control, some that you can't, that create a crisis.
And in Shetty's case, those external pressures, they hit at a time when his companies were already struggling with those internal challenges.
Exactly. And it really shows how interconnected the global economy is.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that businesses need to be adaptable, resilient, able to navigate unpredictable stuff, adjust their strategies when they need to.
Yeah.
I mean, the world's constantly changing.
Right.
And you got to stay ahead of the curve to succeed in the long run.
So to recap, we've got this mix of rapid expansion, high debt, lack of transparency, possible cultural issues, and then all this crazy stuff happening in the global economy.
Right.
I mean, it's no wonder things fell apart.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not saying that these factors definitely caused the collapse. It's more about, understanding the complexities.
Right.
Recognizing the potential warning signs that were there.
Right, so it's about learning from the past.
Exactly.
Even if we can't change it.
Yeah.
Like Shetty's journey from Billionaire to selling his company for next to nothing.
Yeah.
It's a harsh lesson.
It is.
That fortunes can change really quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in the business world.
It's a reminder that success isn't guaranteed.
Right.
Even when it looks like everything's going great.
Yeah.
There are always risks. And sometimes those risks, they come true in ways that you don't expect.
But even after all of this, like, Shetty still managed to get back to Abu Dhabi for that temple inauguration.
Right, yeah.
So what does that mean? Is he trying to make a comeback?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And it's one we're going to explore in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We'll look at what his return could mean and talk about, the bigger lessons his story has for entrepreneurs and investors. So stay tuned.
Okay, yes. Can't wait. Okay. So we've gone through Shetty's, amazing rise, the shocking fall, and all the things that might have led to his empire crumbling. But now we're left with this picture of him, back in Abu Dhabi for that temple thing.
Right, yeah.
What do we make of that?
It's definitely a head scratcher, right? I mean, he's still facing some serious legal problems.
Right.
The Arabian Post article, it mentioned that a Dubai court, they ordered him to pay a bunch of money back to ICICI Bank.
Right.
And this is all stemming from personal guarantees that he made on loans for NMC Healthcare.
And he's appealing that decision, right?
Yeah, he is. He's saying that the signatures of those guarantees were forged.
Okay.
So they're not valid.
Right.
But it just adds to the whole, messiness of the situation. Like he's caught up in all these legal battles, investigations in the UAE, India.
Right.
It's a lot.
Yeah, but even with all that, he still gets his travel ban lifted to go to this temple inauguration. I mean, maybe that means he hasn't completely lost his influence.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, that's one way to look at it.
Yeah.
It could be that he still has, some powerful friends.
Right.
And he's trying to get back some of what he lost.
Yeah. We also have to think about how the public sees him, right?
Right, yeah.
Like Shetty used to be really respected in the UAE.
Yeah, he was a real success story for the Indian diaspora.
Right.
Known for his generosity, community involvement.
Yeah, but now it's all about, like, financial problems and legal trouble.
Yeah, it's a very different picture.
So how do we put these two, like, totally different sides of BR Shetty together?
Well, I think it reminds us that people are complicated. you know?
Yeah.
We can do amazing things.
Right.
But we can also, you know, make choices that have bad consequences. It's possible for someone to be a brilliant businessman.
Okay.
A generous person.
Yeah.
And maybe also someone who doesn't always do the right thing.
It's like those optical illusions, right?
Yeah.
Like, depending on how you look at it, you see something totally different.
Exactly.
There's more to the story than just one perspective.
And with Shetty, I mean, there's still so much we don't know.
Right.
Will he face serious consequences?
Yeah.
Will he try to rebuild his business?
Yeah.
Will he focus on, you know, giving back and fixing his reputation?
Right. Right.
I just don't know yet.
It's almost like we're back at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
With all these questions and not many answers.
It's true, but I think there are still some really important lessons to be learned from Shetty's story.
Yeah.
No matter what happens next.
Yeah. Lessons for entrepreneurs, investors, anyone in business, really.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the biggest takeaways is due diligence.
Oh, yeah. For sure. Whether you're investing in a company, partnering with someone, you got to do your research.
Right.
Don't just take their word for it or be swayed by their charm.
Right.
Dig deep.
Yeah.
Look at the financials, their track records, their reputation.
Yeah.
Ask tough questions.
Like that Muddy Waters report, right?
Yeah.
That was a wake-up call.
Huge wake-up call.
For a lot of investors who had just trusted NMC Health.
Right. They believed the hype.
Yeah.
Without doing their own checking.
Exactly.
And that can be really dangerous.
Another big lesson is transparency and accountability, right? Like if the allegations against Shetty are true, it just shows how bad it can be to try to hide the truth about your finances.
Right. Honesty and integrity.
Yeah.
Those are the foundations of any good business.
Couldn't agree more. And I think there's one more lesson that's super relevant today.
Okay.
And that's, you know, how connected the global economy is.
Right.
Like Shetty's companies, they were affected by all this stuff. Oil prices, you know, geopolitics, stuff he couldn't control.
Right. And in today's world, businesses have to be able to adapt.
Yeah.
You know, be resilient. Got to be ready to deal with unexpected challenges and change your plans when you need to.
Yeah.
I mean, things change fast.
Right.
And if you want to succeed in the long run, you got to stay ahead of the curve.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into BR Shetty's world, we've got, you know, maybe more questions than answers.
Yeah, it's true.
His future's uncertain. His legacy is complicated.
Yeah, fact.
But I think we can all agree that his story is a powerful reminder that success isn't permanent. And even the biggest empires can fall apart if they're built on shaky ground.
And while we don't know what's next for Shetty, I'm sure his story will continue to be, you know, studied and debated for years to come.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll even become a case study in business schools.
Right.
A cautionary tale about what happens when ambition goes unchecked.
Right.
And how important it is to do business ethically.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. And until next time, keep learning, keep asking questions, and never stop diving deep.